Well, a very pleasant good afternoon to you, wherever you are. I wanted to take a few minutes and talk to you today about Richard Nixon. I'm not sure that we have a politician in the post World War II era that dominates American life, much like Richard Nixon does. I think in some ways it would be fair to call that 50-year period after World War II as the age of Nixon. He is one of two men to be nominated for president or vice president 5 times by a major political party. Franklin Roosevelt is the only other man to be nominated that many times for the two highest offices in the land by a major political party. That says something about Richard Nixon's staying power. It says something about his appeal. I think it says an awful lot about Richard Nixon and his perseverance. Let me try as best as I can to explain just a couple of maybe some insights into Nixon and into his character. You must remember that he comes from very modest means. He does not come from money. His mom and dad ran a small family-owned business, a grocery store in Whittier, California. I think in Nixon's case, I think it's fair to say that he harbored deep resentments against those who had more. I think he really saw his life as a struggle, as a battle, kind of a us against them kind of mentality. Nixon became very adept at reading the mind of the average, the everyday American. And I think he was very successful in what we might call the politics of grievance. Let me tap into those who have resentments against the system. Let me tap into those who feel that others are taking advantage or having more than do you or I. I think he was very successful at that. And I think it's not unfair to say that we live in a day where some politicians are getting very good at that same politics of divisiveness, that same politics of grievance that we saw pioneered, really, by Richard Nixon. The resentment against those who had more. I mean, think about his big enemies, if you will, in politics. Helen Gahagan Douglas, who ran against him for the Senate in 1950, came from Hollywood, came from a little bit of money through acting and whatnot. Of course, he lost a bitter election to John F. Kennedy in 1960. Again, the haves and the have-nots. I think even within his own political party, even within the Republicans, he had some rather contentious and bitter, excuse me, bitter competitions with the governor of New York, Nelson Rockefeller. Again, haves and the have-nots. And I think Nixon felt that those guys who had been born with a silver spoon in their mouth, they didn't appreciate what they had. They didn't have to work as hard. It was all given to them, at least in Nixon's telling. Whereas in his case, everything was scratched for and clawed for and fought for, and you had to be tougher and you had to be hungrier than the other guy. I think Nixon felt very acutely the people who had more than he did. I think he felt that. John Kennedy went to Harvard. Richard Nixon went to Whittier College. And I think he framed his life in many ways with that argument, those who have versus the rest of us. And I think that fueled the politics of grievance. And I think it's in some ways fair to say that Richard Nixon might not have ever achieved the stature, the greatness that he did achieve, had it not been for that resentment that fueled him. I really think every day was a struggle for him against those who were better looking, those who were more charming, those who just had it all, who could little appreciate and would little appreciate what he went through. I think he also resented those who had more of other things, better education, I mentioned, more money, um, more of a mother's love even. His mother left the family for about a year to go tend to sick uh, siblings of Nixon's and some other kids who were dying of tuberculosis. I think Nixon felt that too, that absence. He said once that my mother never told me that she loved me. And then very quickly he said, but I knew that she did because of the things that she did for us. Now imagine growing up and never hearing your mother say that she loved you. I can't even imagine that type of an emptiness that a child would feel not hearing that. In fact, when Richard Nixon announces he's going to China in 1971, one of his close aides said to an associate, imagine how far this man could have gone, what he could have accomplished, speaking of Nixon, had somebody just told him that they loved them. And that's pretty powerful stuff, and stuff that frankly has made the psychologists who want to be historians, as well as the historians who want to be psychologists, it's kept them up at night and very, very busy for the last 50 or 60 years. I think politics for Nixon, I think he really did believe in public service. I think he really felt that it was ennobling to serve. I think he really felt very strongly about the issues, peace at home, victory over communism. I think he really believed that. I don't think he was as cynical in that, and certainly not about communism in the way that, let's say, Senator McCarthy was. I don't think Nixon was cynical in that regard. I think, yes, he saw the political benefit, but I think anti-communism came very naturally to Richard Nixon. I think he truly believed that that was not the right system for the United States, and I think he really did believe that the communists were bent on world domination, and so he devoted his life really to the defeat of communism. And I do think he was very sincere in that. For Nixon, politics, I think, changed him. I think he did come in with some idealism. I think early in his political career as a congressman, I think he was looked at as one of the upstanding young men of the Congress. I think he was looked at, certainly by the Republicans, as somebody who had a future, somebody who was going places within the party. And I think even the national press saw that about him. I think some of that started to turn when he found Alger Hiss as a communist. I think some negative press began to emerge. But I think not like in 1950 when he ran for the Senate in California against Helen Gahagan Douglas, who I mentioned previously, had been a congresswoman, had also been an actress in Hollywood, married an actor, Melvin Douglas. And Nixon really ran on an anti-communist platform and alleged, a little unfairly, that Congresswoman Douglas was helping the Communist Party, that she was, as he put it, pink all the way down to her underwear, the pink lady accusation. And I think for some people that idea that Nixon would fight in that way kind of changed him in some people's opinion, that here this guy watch him. He's going to say anything, do anything to win. Winning is all that matters. And people began to question, many people in the press and others who had previously had a fairly positive opinion of Richard Nixon, began to wonder about his political scruples, his morals. Was winning all that mattered? And whatever you had to do or whatever you had to say in order to win, it's all in a campaign. Be that as it may, I think politics began to change for him in that campaign. The press started to be a little more critical of him, a little more, they began to fight back or attack. And I think for Nixon and his wife, politics became less of a ennobling thing and more of a struggle. Back to the word struggle again. And you see it in 1952 when he runs against for the vice presidency for Dwight Eisenhower, and he is alleged to have had a secret fund. Not true. It was above board, it was audited, it was privately controlled, but the public perception that had begun to turn in 1950 of a guy who might do anything or say anything to win, now in 1950, the sentiment was, well, how far is he willing to go to win? Is there an honesty issue? Is this man corruptible? Is he corrupt? And I think politics began to change for him in the 1950s. And I think more so when he loses in 1960 to John Kennedy by the slimmest of margins, 118,000 votes out of 70 million. And there were allegations of vote fraud. There were allegations that the Democrats had taken advantage in Illinois and in Texas. And enough allegations that it is reported that President Eisenhower went to Nixon and said, look, I'll help you raise money for a recount. I think you were robbed. And Nixon said, it would not be good for the country. I don't want to do this. Interesting words, especially in these days. A politician putting the country ahead of his own personal gain. And then Nixon goes to California, leaves the national scene at the age of 47, goes back to California, has an ill-advised run for the governorship, loses by 250,000 votes, and in a state election, that's quite a chunk. I think politics kind of lost its appeal for Nixon, at least from the standpoint of it being, I think he saw the rules changing. And I think Nixon felt that if he wanted to play in this game, and he did, he wanted to be a politician, he wanted to make a difference, he wanted to be a part of the world stage, that he was going to have to change too, that he was going to have to change the rules that he played by. Much more no holds barred, don't ask for a quarter, but don't give a quarter either. And I think you start to see, I really believe that where politics changes for Nixon in the 50s and into the early 60s, I think you see the Nixon emerge who, again, remember, carrying resentments, carrying grudges, and feeling that the haves and the have-nots, look at what the haves are willing to do. They control everything, and they're going to get me unless I get them first. And I do believe after 1962, when we get into the 1968 presidential campaign, I think that Nixon is definitely once bitten, twice shy. Much more careful, much more cautious, much more guarded, much more willing to punish enemies, much more willing to get them before they can get me, kind of thing. And I think you see, if you really examine his career in that very pivotal time period of when politics starts to not be quite as charming as it once was in the early days of his career to more of a no holds barred, there are no rules kind of mentality. And the seeds for Watergate, I think, are being planted in the 1960s. Well, anyway, enough about Nixon for now. When I talk to you again in a couple of days, let's talk about Watergate. Have a great day.